Do you ever wonder why your photos just don't quite capture the magic that other photographers seem to get in their edits? Well, after 8 years of literally making every editing mistake there is to make, here's 9 key things separating amateur edits from the pros. Ready? Let's do it. All right, so mistake number 1 is you're not getting it right in camera. Here's the analogy I want you to think of. Cooking an amazing meal requires getting the right ingredients, right? Like if you have amazing technique, it's not gonna help you if you're trying to bake a cake but don't have any flour. If you're trying to cook a steak, but all you have is deli meat, it doesn't matter how good you are at cooking, right? So it doesn't matter how good you are at editing if you're starting with the wrong ingredients in your photos. The single greatest way to improve your edits isn't by editing at all. It's by improving the photography that you're starting out with. So the closer that image starts to the style you're trying to actually go for, the easier it's gonna be to get it the rest of the way. Editing mistake number 2 is not paying enough attention to the big things and focusing in on the small things. So many photographers, when they're starting out, we're looking for a secret trick. We're looking for the little techniques that are gonna take our image and put that secret sauce on it, right? The basics, like the exposure, the white balance, the contrast, the shadows, the blacks, the whites, that's gonna be like 60% of your edit. And then 30% of it is gonna come maybe from the HSL panel, and that last 10%, that's everything else. The adjustment layers, the fancy masking tricks, like all those different things. Pros really spend a lot more time on the basics than anything else. In fact, this is so important. Mistake number 3 when it comes to editing is actually directly connected, because mistake number 3 is not nailing your white balance. Now, this is something I see over and over and over again, because in Lightroom, everything that you have laid out in the develop module goes from order of importance, from top down. So why do you think they've put white balance and exposure at the very top? Yeah, because they are literally the 2 things that impact your images more than anything else. So that's where you want to spend the most time. And if your white balance is off, what you might not realize is it's not just making it feel more warm or more cold. As you're adjusting your white balance and making it colder, you're actually going to find that the saturation in your blues and your greens is going to go higher, and the saturation in your reds and your yellows is going to go lower. And the same thing goes when you actually make a white balance warmer. When you warm up the image, okay, all of a sudden it's going to make your blues and your greens less saturated. So if you want to edit a sunset photo, for example, and you take those vibrant pinks and those blues and you just want to get that intense, amazing sunset in the sky, if you dial up your white balance because you think, oh, sunset, I should make this nice and warm and golden, right? It's golden hour. It's actually going to wash out your sky because it's going to do the opposite of what you want. So recently, I've actually switched to using Imagen AI for editing my weddings, and the biggest thing I'm using it for isn't the fancy tricks and techniques. It's actually just getting the white balance right. Because if I can get that right, everything else is going to be so much better. If your presets aren't working, might be because your white balance or your exposure is wrong. Talking about AI and editing tools kind of leads us into mistake number 4, which is presets and using them the wrong way. Now, when I was starting out in photography, I thought that the right preset would be the magic pill, right? If I just bought this person's presets, my photos would look like them. And maybe you are smarter than me, but I honestly thought that was the case. And if I got a preset and it didn't work, I'd blame it on the preset. Let's go back to our cooking analogy. If you're cooking a meal, a great chef can actually adapt the recipe, whether you are missing an ingredient and you need to substitute something else. Maybe the taste of the person you're cooking for, they like this, but they don't like that. Okay, you can adjust. Now, photography presets are exactly like recipes. They're gonna get you in the ballpark. They're a great starting point, a great guide, but you have to actually adapt them to the ingredients you have on hand, the raw photo that you're starting from. The light changes from shoot to shoot, the lenses change from shoot to shoot, the subjects are changing, the time of year is changing. It's not the preset. There is no perfect preset. Some are better than others, but to get the look you're going for and the look that that photographer got, you need to actually start with images that match their images. Now, mistake number 5 is kind of on that same track, over-editing your images. Probably the most common thing when you're starting out is to say to yourself, oh, this slider goes up to 100, I should probably put it to 100, right? The best photos don't really feel edited. I want you to think about this for a second. The best movies, when it comes to color grading, they don't really look color graded. Now, I'm not saying that you can't tell they've been color graded or that they've been polished or adjusted, but what I mean is that the edits themselves, the colors themselves, aren't really taking you out of that story. So even if you have a really super edited, grainy, nostalgic black and white photo, that image somehow still feels right? It feels like it was supposed to be that way. Sometimes you do have photos or movies when the colors don't look like real life, and that's fine. Like a black and white movie, none of us see in black and white. Or say in The Matrix, where all of the scenes inside the Matrix have a much more green color tinge to give us the sense that we're in a different world, because we are. And so realistic colors might not actually work as well as these colors because they're supporting the creative decision. And so your goal is to actually capture the image in a way that supports the story that you're trying to tell and supports the emotions you're trying to convey. But most amateurs, when they start out, they're so focused on adding as much saturation and contrast and pop and sharpness as they possibly can, and they're not even thinking about the story and the intention behind what they're doing. And so the edit it feels off. It just doesn't feel right. Like sometimes you can get away with tons of contrast. Sometimes you can get away with tons of saturation. Great editing is storytelling, okay? So mistake number 6 is not using a reference image, and this is the fastest way to improve your editing style, is having an amazing photo that you love this edit, you love this vibe, you have that right next to your images as you're editing, and you compare. Because using a reference photo can dramatically improve your editing and help you determine what actually looks right, what feels right. Because the longer you edit, or if you're using a less than perfect monitor, or you're whatever, there's a ton of different reasons that when you're editing on a screen, your eyes adapt and they just don't notice when things feel off. But if you have a reference image right beside you and you can compare it, you're going to instantly improve your editing. The biggest difference between me and the friends I have who are honestly way better than me isn't actually that they know a bunch of tricks I don't. They're just better somehow at sensing how a photo should look, right? And so they can dial in the contrast exactly where it needs to be when I'm a classic over editor and I'll try and edit things way too far. So a reference image gives you a benchmark for your color, your contrast, your feel, and helps you keep your edits really consistent. So I'd highly recommend giving it a try inside of Lightroom. Mistake number 7 is not using keyboard shortcuts. Now, when I edit a super big wedding and I have like 1,200 photos to deliver, I might be saving 3 or 4 seconds per photo by using my shortcuts. And it doesn't sound like much, but when you actually do the math, that's like 2 hours of editing time that I've saved. And over an entire season of weddings, I'm saving like 30, 40 hours of work. So Lightroom does have a daunting amount of shortcuts, I understand, but there's really only like 6 that in my opinion are must-know shortcuts. And if you learn these, you'll save a ton of time and get like pretty much everything you need to know. Number 1 is quickly adjusting your main editing settings with the plus and minus keys. So you can actually adjust what you're setting with the period key. So if you're always using this to adjust your exposure, you can use plus and minus to adjust exposure. If you hit period, you can adjust your white balance with plus and minus. So you can scroll through the main settings using the period key and then use your plus and minus to make quick adjustments. This is my number 1 all the time, every photo this shortcut gets used, so use this. Number 2 is adjust any settings up or down by hovering over it and then using your arrow keys. So you can open up any setting inside of Lightroom, and even if you don't know the shortcut, just by hovering over it with your mouse, you can go up and down and fine tune it. This is really helpful, especially in the tone curve tool, where you can really make fine-tuned adjustments. And if you hold Alt, you can make these adjustments even smaller. And if you hold Shift, you can make these adjustments even bigger. Now, number 3 is to get back and forth to crop, because you're gonna be cropping and straightening your images all the time. Just use the R key. That's a really easy one that you should definitely know. Trick number 4 is in making local adjustments, you don't want to actually go up into your adjustment panel and click and open up the brush and then select where to brush. Just hit K on your keyboard and you'll open up an adjustment brush instantly. Likewise, if you hit M or Shift M on your keyboard, you can make a gradient filter or a radial filter. So those 3, K, M, and Shift M, that's all you need to know for your adjustments, and it'll save you a ton of time going back and forth with your mouse. And finally, if you are going to be going back and forth between your library, your develop module, and then previewing the image and zooming in, there's really only 3 shortcuts that I highly recommend. It's G for grid view, D for develop view, and the F key to switch back and forth into full screen. So G, D, and F. And 90% of the time, that's literally all the shortcuts you need to know. That's all the juice in just 6 shortcuts. So learn them, use them, you will thank me later. Now, let's go on to mistake number 8 when it comes to editing: not working in batches or having a workflow. When you're starting out in photography, most of the time you just like open up your photos, you're excited, you get started right away on like the first image, right? And the problem is, if you do it this way and you don't have any intention, you're going to have edits that are all over the place, and it's gonna take you a lot longer than it needs to. Start by editing your images in bulk, and then you can narrow down to individual edits. So for example, if you're editing a wedding, start with your base preset for that day. Just find a preset that you like the looks of. Cool. Apply that to everything. Then you should render your previews. Now, most people, when they import their photos, do the previews right away, then they apply a preset. And the problem is then Lightroom's gonna re-render that preview because you've updated the preset settings. Just by having a workflow that's in the right order, you'll save a lot of time, your computer will work better. And then you can dive into the next stage, which is like a slightly smaller batch. The ceremony, we can go in and find the white balance for one of the images and apply it to all the images from the ceremony that were in similar lighting conditions. And chances are, you can actually just do this and it'll get your photos like 80% of the way there. So all you have to finally do is go through when you actually edit your individual images, and most of the time just make a tiny tweak here and there. Adjust the exposure up a little bit, make it a little warmer, a little colder. It saves you a ton of time versus doing this one image at a time over and over and over and over again. And last of all, mistake number 9 when it comes to editing is inconsistent editing conditions. Now, this is one that I learned the hard way. If you're editing photos and sometimes you're editing in the dark, sometimes you're editing with this monitor, sometimes you're editing during the daytime or in a super bright room, you're going to find that your images really vary depending on the conditions you're editing in. So if you edit in a dark room with the lights off, that screen's gonna look super bright. And so you're going to naturally just edit your images a lot more dark than you should. If, however, you're in a super bright sunny room with light directly in your eyes, you're gonna have the opposite problem. You won't be able to see your screen, so your edits will just naturally be too bright. So try to actually figure out the right conditions and make it consistent when you're editing, and your editing will get better. But sometimes when I'm editing, I'm on the road, I'm on a plane, I'm doing whatever, I can't actually be in a controlled environment. Like, it's nice to be on a calibrated monitor, it's nice to have a big screen you're editing on, but if you can't do that, this comes back to our earlier trick. You wanna use a reference photo. Your edits will always align and be consistent no matter the conditions, where you're editing, when you're editing, or what you're editing on. So that's the 9 key editing mistakes to avoid if you want to look more like a pro with your edits. Not getting it right in camera. Don't skip the basics panel. Nail your white balance. Spend time there. Don't rely on presets. You want to tweak them and learn what you need to adjust for each photo to really make it sing. Give the image what it needs to look natural and real and support the story. Use a reference image whenever possible because that's going to make your edits a lot more consistent. You want to make sure you are using keyboard shortcuts. It's going to save you a ton of time working in batches and having a workflow. And number 9 is inconsistent editing conditions. We want to say goodbye to those whenever possible. And if you can't, just use a reference image so that you make sure your images are consistent. So with all these editing traps in mind, which do you find yourself falling into? I'm really curious. Let me know in the comments. Is there something that I missed? A trick that you actually think people should know about? If you found this video helpful, give me a like and a subscribe for more insights if you want more content like this. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Create something awesome. Peace.